Welcome to the season 2 of the In Your Shoes podcast. The podcast aims to get into the shoes of a person like you and me and learn from their career stories and experiences. Through this conversation, we will uncover insights and pearls of wisdom which will hopefully inspire you and expand your thinking. We're doing something different this season. Apart from a full-length show, we will also expand on topics of interest that emerge during the conversation. These will be distributed as special episodes, which are short, targeted, and provide you with the context when you are short on time. Let us get right into it. Thank you, Geetha, for choosing to join this podcast today. I really appreciate you giving us the time for this show.
Thanks, Vivek, for having me here. It's a pleasure to be a part of this podcast.
So, Ms. Geetha, can you just share a little bit about yourself, like what you do for a living, where you come from, so that our audience can get to know a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Vivek. I'm Geetha. I stay in Bangalore in India. I actually studied in a coastal district of Karnataka. So I am an engineer basically. So I have done my BE, MTech and my PhD from NITK Surathkal. So I spent a lot of time in coastal Karnataka, which is very different from Bangalore where I stay, including the weather and all of these things. And apart from this, I've been, into the teaching profession. I've traveled a lot. I've been to different countries. I've delivered lectures in India and in countries abroad. And I actually was in Botswana for quite some time. I used to teach at the Polytechnic in Botswana. Mm-hmm. And yes, I also teach maths for school children, which is just a passion of mine to, teach children how to interpret maths and to understand maths. So this in brief is, what I am.
Thank you so much. So, Geetha, what brought you to this profession? Like, why did you choose this profession?
What happened was when I was in my school, I used to see a lot of schools with no teachers. Or I used to see a couple of schools with just one headmaster who used to actually manage a couple of classes. And, he used to have a tough time managing these classes all alone, single-handedly. So I was wondering why is it that we don't have, so many teachers in schools? And also among my classmates, I used to find there were so many who couldn't understand what was happening in class. Apart from this, I had, classmates who had studied in the local language. And, they, after a few classes in the local language, they came and joined the English medium school. And for them, understanding anything and everything in class was actually a tough call. So I had to teach them in the lunch break. Especially English was a major problem for them. They couldn't understand. And as I grew in my engineering classes, I used to have a lot of my seniors who used to teach me. And this peer learning was great. So I felt, that teaching is something, which encompasses so many of these domains, including teaching people who don't know much or learning from somebody who's already learned so much. So that is what kind of pushed me into this profession. Apart from this, my dad, was a teacher. He continues to teach. And my grandfather was also a teacher. So probably even, teaching was running in the family as well. So, multiple reasons for me taking up teaching as a profession. And I've also realized it's quite fulfilling and, it's kind of satisfying. So.
What I liked very interesting about what you said was like you observed how students were reacting when they're being taught in schools and the lack of good teachers. What aspects and what part of the teacher-student interaction that you found interesting enough that this is what you chose as your focus area for the last 30 years. So if you could just spend the time between the teacher and student interaction, so that it really gives us a view of how you perceived it, how you saw that in the earlier part of your life, which actually led you to this inspiration that you had to get into this field and you had to do things differently to really make an impact to this life.
Yes, a couple of things actually happened during my school days. So we used to have some teachers, who were very good and who would actually reciprocate and, understand what the student wanted. And there was also a different kind of learning. But we also used to have instances where, students couldn't ask questions, they couldn't learn. So then they used to seek help from other students themselves. So that's when I felt that even pure learning was adding value to these students. But some of the teachers whom I had, whom I still cherish, some of them are no more now. But the way they used to teach in class, especially mathematics, the way they used to teach in class, they were able to interpret and related to a practical application, and that is what used to matter to so many students, because they were able to understand what the teacher was trying to convey. So related to a day-to-day situation, it could be science or social studies. So when you feel you are a part of the learning, that is when the kind of interest in a class gets generated. And these are the teachers who actually inspired me, thinking that yes, relate everything to a very small thing in a day-to-day activity, and that kind of makes you remember things in a way that you don't have to do it by rote learning or by memorizing. So this is what actually inspired me a lot when teachers were teaching me.
I think that's a really, really interesting point. And I want to spend some time there. So you mentioned about, I would say, prevalence, and something that I'm kind of taking out from what you said, and also for part of my experience growing up in that part of the world, is there's a prevalence of rote learning and less emphasis on this experiential and connecting to the day-to-day things. From your point of view, why is that the norm? Why is rote learning is a norm instead of the experiential and this peer-based learning, which you really felt were good alternatives to what has been happening so far?
Basically, our education, the way our education system is, if having traveled across the world, I've seen that the way we need to learn is by doing things. So most of the time we get pushed into a classroom where you have a curriculum that is prescribed. It could be in school, it could be in the smallest class as your second standard or third grade or fourth grade. So we have a curriculum, we have a structure, and somehow I have seen there are very few who would actually like to go out of the textbook learning and probably spend a little more time in encouraging the students to even discuss among themselves or even comprehend about the session. And what I also see is that the student doesn't know in advance what is going to be taught in today's class. So it's always good for the teacher to tell in advance that this is what we are going to learn. So the student actually, even if he doesn't read, he can probably recollect his experiences or get a feel for what is going to happen in the class. And we don't have as much activity based learning. So I think including these activity based learning, like for example, visiting a nearby grocery store, or if a student has been going to a grocery store, if the teacher can ask how did he actually end up paying money to the grocer and then getting the change back, that will actually make mathematics so simple. It is just addition and subtraction. So I think experiential learning has to be included right from school days, which I haven't seen, in our education system. I think that is what matters a lot. And teachers of late, they get bound by these, like there's no autonomy, there's lack of freedom. So they need this freedom to be able to inculcate this experiential learning in the classrooms.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Uh, you mentioned that in order to promote experiential learning, you would like to see teachers getting, I would say, more autonomous and also more freedom to pursue that aspect of learning. What else do you see that could help experiential learning become more a norm and a common thing in the Indian education society?
Yeah. So, and the other thing, yeah, to answer your question, we focus a lot on the grading system, the marking system. So it's always an objective kind of a system. It's like, the student writes something and then you mark it and then you give marks. It's always good to have a part of the assessment as a subjective assessment as well. I've seen students who are not able to write exams, who really cannot do it. But we've never tried to understand why the student is not able to write an exam, or why he or she is not able to score marks in the exam. So it's not a cup of tea for everybody. So the cause for the problem is really not well understood. So from my past experience as a teacher, that's what I've seen. When they express, I realize there are multiple reasons for students not being able to write exams. So at the end of the day, our measuring stick is only that marks card. So for some time, they had included this grading system, which is subjective. But then some teachers felt that the subjective system was becoming very biased. So unless we draw the line, to understand how well the subjective system can be used and can be used as a measure, it becomes very difficult. So that is what pushes student to a rote learning mechanism, because all he wants to do is clear the exam, get marks, and then go somewhere. So we miss that learning curve in itself. So I think the assessment also should change if the teaching mechanism has to become experiential learning. Otherwise you can't assess the person. If he's learned how to do maths in a very different way, there's no mechanism of assessing it.
That is actually so true. So right. I want to actually go back to the point about this whole experiential versus rote learning and just explore this topic a little bit with you, because I think there's a lot of value in what you just said. What do you feel and what do you see as the degenerative or the negative effects of rote learning for a particular student in their future? So, for example, if a student has always been asked to go through this process of rote learning in the earlier part of careers and they grow up and they land up a job or a profession, how do you see that whole experience of going through the rote learning shapes their thinking in their careers and in their future?
Well, very interesting question, and yeah, multiple answers to this. That if a student goes with rote learning, okay, uh, there are times when he or she is not able to think differently. Just as an example, if you have a subject which has a whole lot of formulae which a student has to actually remember, he's wasting so much of his productive memory power in trying to memorize the equations, and he fails to spend so much of time in trying to understand how and where he could use these equations, where in fact, as when you are employed, you really don't need to remember any of these equations. If you've understood them, if you're able to interpret them, there's always a handbook which can give you the list of equations. So I believe that when we are assessing a student, it's good to give a cheat sheet kind of thing, which I generally used to suggest, that you give the formula sheet in itself. so that the student has understood the equation or whatever is required. Let him not memorize and waste his memory power in remembering this. And if memory fails in the exam, then he messes up that entire question and he ends up getting less marks, and then that becomes detrimental to the student because he didn't do well. But it's not a fault of his, because he couldn't remember the equation. So I think that, when we are assessing students, it's good that we interpret whatever is required and provide them with this information which he need not remember. So that expands his thinking ability, and that kind of percolates in his workplace because he is able to interpret and do differently. So if you're given the cheat sheet, you'll find lot of students would be solving the same question in different ways because they're able to spend time in doing the sum, not in recollecting the equation. So this actually I've seen has a lot of effect in their performance. Even otherwise, it could be in project execution, it could be in just delivery, it could be in solving non-technical problems as well. So this really adds value to the education. Apart from this, I also would think students and whoever is learning, they should get involved in activities which are very different from their curriculum. Like if it's a technical course, then they should be doing some literary activity where they're able to bring out their creativity, think about solving problems in different ways. So this also adds value to their experiential learning, will help in their profession as well.
I think it's a very interesting point, and I think so rampant, at least in the times that I was growing up in India. I think it's also an aspect around families and parents. Perhaps I would be wrong at this point in time, but at least the time where I was growing up, being more focused in getting the grades that they think their kids should have instead of really directing them to the experiential based learning. So what I would like to learn from you is, how do you see the role of a family of parents in this process, especially in the field of education, to steer young kids and young children from rote learning to experiential based learning?
Yes, I think you've raised a very good point. This is again a big question mark of, it's like the chicken and the egg, what should be first? So I think both will go hand in hand. So it's always good to even speak with parents, be it school or be it a college or an institution. It's always good to even address what parents feel. Whenever I've spoken to parents, they also, some of them are actually not very happy with the rote learning as well. But what happens is they get involved in the entire system in such a manner that there is no way out for them or for the children. So it should be a complete involvement of all the stakeholders. So when we are trying to change the assessment, or trying to say that there should be a subjective evaluation, so there should be probably a feedback system, feedback mechanism, asking inputs from parents. It's not that everything can be incorporated into the entire system, because they'll have their own problems of running the entire educational system. But I think taking feedback from students as well as parents, and it's not a difficult task to actually convey and tell them that this is going to be an okay way of doing things, or it'll actually help their kid. But most of the time it's more like the other person is doing it. So if my son or daughter doesn't do it, will he fall back in his education? Will he not get what he wants? This fear is there in parents. So that is why I think most of them try to push the kid to do something where all the other children are also doing. So I think involvement of all stakeholders to understand what is it that they want, what is it that we can deliver from the education system, I think that will really add value. And most parents are open to it. It's just that they are unable to, get this change up and running in any of the institutions.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. The sense of fear, and that this fear creates the the pressure for the parents to also start expecting rote learning from their children, from their kids. I want to pause on this topic for a minute because there's sort of a lot of valuable part here, but I want to just circle back to your life and as an educator. So from your day-to-day experience as an educator, as a teacher, what are the different challenges that one has to go through on a daily basis? And if you can share those challenges in terms of being an educator, being a teacher.
Sure. Actually, most people think that, teaching is kind of an easy task, going to a class and delivering, but it isn't so. Basically, because you could be teaching the same subject, but the audience would be different. And if you have about, 60 to 70 students in a class, that's generally the batch size, you will find a totally heterogeneous crowd of students in the class. And if you try to cater to one set of students, the other set of students will not be able to comprehend. So being able to prepare for different kinds of students in the audience. And I'm saying, if you're teaching the same subject for over 5 to 6 years, every class is going to be a new class. And the kind of doubts that students ask, provided they're encouraged to ask, I think that's another important thing in our system, that we should encourage students to ask questions. So teachers also actually become learners. So there is a fear in some of the teachers, who think if the student asks too many questions, maybe I won't be able to answer them. So this is actually a challenge for a teacher, to be able to prepare, themselves for the kind of questions that students ask them. This is a great challenge. Apart from this, also relating, the curriculum to something else, that also is a big challenge. I think that needs a lot of preparation for a teacher, plus the assessment and the grading system. Yeah, that is again a big challenge for the teaching profession.
I think what you just shared are really valuable, and I think one of the aspects which really stood out for me in your stories about challenges is the aspect of a teacher is also learning as they are teaching. And I want to just spend some time on this aspect of the teaching profession itself. How do you feel teachers and actually individuals who have been teaching or who want to get into teaching really change their mindset about this whole aspect of, as you teach, you're also learning, and you don't get into this fear that you're being asked a question that you do not understand? What has been your process through this, and what do you think people can do to be able to shift that mindset of a teacher does not need to know everything, but they're also learning as the process of teaching is going on?
Yes, I think basically the teacher has to trust the student, So the faith in the student, most of the time, we assume when the student is asking a question, the teacher shouldn't assume that, the student is actually questioning the knowledge of the teacher, or he's trying to test the teacher. So that isn't the view with which the students are asking questions. It's basically they wouldn't have really understood. And there are times when students would be sitting in a class where they're really not interested, he or she wouldn't want to be sitting in that class, but they're still there. And as they listen, they realize they're really not able to understand what the teacher is trying to tell. That's when they start asking questions. So I think, as a teacher, we need to have faith in that entire class, and also that, we should be able to read much more than what is required for that class, so that, we are well prepared, assuming that most of the questions we are able to answer. And if we are not able to answer, it's always good for a teacher to say that, he or she doesn't know the answer, and they'll always get back to the student the next day. The student is very happy when the teacher is honest and tells the student crowd that the teacher really doesn't know this, because they also know very well that teacher will not know everything. But if the teacher doesn't convey this and, tries to evade the question, that is when the student will actually lose faith in the teacher. So I think the most important thing for the teacher is to be able to trust the student, so that the student in turn will also trust so much with the teacher that when teacher says, I don't know the answer to this question, maybe he'll bring an answer to the class the very next day. That could be a very nice thing. You can always ask the student to bring answers, saying that you don't know the answer, so please see if you can find out and come. So that is how, I think this challenge of not knowing an answer to the student's question can be probably addressed by the teacher.
That's really insightful. So, Ms. Geetha, what are the different skills that a person who chooses this career as an educator or teacher needs to have, needs to build? And if you could share these skills that you felt has been useful for yourself to thrive in this career for that long.
Yes. Most of the time, when teaching is considered as a profession, so whoever wants to, become a teacher, or generally this interest kind of starts quite early. From, my past experience, from when I've seen and I've spoken to people, they say, yeah, they would like to be a teacher. So it could possibly be, a reason that they weren't able to understand so much in class that they would like to be, able to deliver, or they are not very happy with the system, that they would like to bring about a change, so they would like to, become teachers. So these are the kind of people who think, teaching and getting into academics, this is good for them. So what probably would help people who are interested in being a part of this profession is uh, interacting with people in whatever manner. Of course, now in the pandemic times, I'm not very sure how this actual physical interaction would take place, even if it's a virtual interaction. But, basically understand the needs of the person. That is when teaching will actually add value. So it isn't about, we make a curriculum, we make a course, and then we deliver it, not even thinking whether, the audience is happy getting this kind of curriculum or not. So we say there is a need assessment that is, required. So the first thing that, a person who would like to become a teacher is to be able to understand, what exactly would a person need. Because at the end of the day, I believe that teaching is just not about delivering a lecture in a classroom. It's making a proper individual or a citizen or a member of the society, which goes beyond the classroom. So if, people can actually relate to their own local environment, that's going to add value to their interest in becoming a teacher. So I think the experiences with different people, to be able to convey well, to be able to speak and talk, that also is a requirement. Because at times, when I've seen in classes, maybe your preparation, you will actually run out of material for a 1 hour session. So you should have enough material to be able to handle the class for the entire duration of 1 hour. So, a teacher should also look at talking about other things apart from what is there in the syllabus. So that's when reading a lot, having a lot of other experiences will also add value to a teacher, that it becomes kind of a wholesome learning, not only the curriculum based learning.
I really liked all of the points that you mentioned. And to also ascertain the aspect of this modern learning that we are talking about, uh, these days we have people who are not just learning in schools and universities in the traditional form, but they're also learning from online, like the online courses, YouTube. Um, Access to the knowledge is now like rampant. You can have anything available to you in few seconds. So with this upsurge in the mediums in which a student can access information and can learn, how do you see this um, influences on the skills that a teacher needs to have in this new age, especially with now we're talking about teachers moving to online using Zoom or Hangouts to run classes and to run sessions. What has that, how has that influenced the skills that you would like teachers to have?
I think it's a very relevant question, Vivek, and I would be really happy to answer this question in whatever way I think is kind of relevant to what's going on now. So I think what the skill sets that are required currently, if you're looking at the skill sets, we look at any person to have multiple skill sets, unlike in the days about 10-15 years ago. So with technology advancing so much, the expectation from the person who recruits whoever it is, who is going to be an employee or the employer, so their expectations from a person are that they should have multiple skill sets. So if you're looking at the current scenario, these virtual classes and the online courses, they are actually supplementing this. But at some point of time, the real classroom learning, I think, can really not be replaced. So all of these things will add value. They will supplement. And for a person who is already done his graduation, or who is already gained some kind of a knowledge in a particular area, these are classes which will add value to whatever he's already learned, or it will supplement his learning. So that way, having these virtual classes, online classes, that is very good, because they can learn anything from anywhere and supplement their already existing learning, or the graduation or the certification which they already have. Apart from this, the reach has actually become a genuine problem, especially I'm looking at areas here in India, in Karnataka, or near Bangalore where I stay. I still think that the access to these virtual platforms, the access to improving their skill sets in the rural areas, I think that access is still lacking. Probably if that can be built, then it will be good. Otherwise, most of the time, all of these courses are accessible to people who already have the resources. So they are just grooming themselves over and above the knowledge that they already have. So if there's an engineering graduate, then he or she is adding values, skill sets to what they already have. But I think if we improve the reach and provide these resources to people who don't have access, that will probably add more value to the teaching and the learning from the virtual classes. But I would say it's a supplement to learning. For people who want to jump into different domains, it adds value. But I think the basic learning has to be kind of a classroom learning.
And if I just want to stay on that point for a moment, for a teacher to be able to embrace these mediums, what would be the areas of expertise and experience you would like them to have? Like, for example, I have often spoken to teachers who have not been able to adjust themselves into leveraging Hangouts and Zoom and all these mediums to undertake their classes and the sessions. And they also feel challenged to be able to communicate in that forum where they don't have a face-to-face access to it, but rather over a medium. And for these teachers who are coming from the traditional forms, it has been a challenge. So do you see any specific skills that they should acquire to be able to embrace and also thrive in this new environment?
Yes, that actually again boils down to teaching and training. So it's very true, that teachers have not been able to, adjust to this kind of teaching methods. The face-to-face, discussion or the interaction with the student is not there. So teachers, I felt, were not enabled because it would have been good if some kind of training was incorporated into their initial stages of them taking up virtual or online classes, because I know for a fact that there were a lot of people who didn't have access to computers in itself, leave alone the virtual classroom or using Zoom or any other platform. So they didn't have, maybe they had, but it wasn't a regular access to computers. So getting used to, probably computers were more used as a mechanism for drafting question papers, documentation and things like that. So I think for teachers it was definitely a major challenge, probably training, and I think people who are in the industry, the IT sector, they can actually form consortiums of taking up this as a CSR, for them to be able to train the teachers, teach them what are the platforms that they have always been using, right? Industry has been using these mechanisms for quite some time. So if industry can reach out to the educational institutions by forming consortiums and training teachers, that is very important, then they would be able to do this. It is definitely a challenge. I think again, teaching and training these teachers, so train the trainer is what we tell, I think that has to be emphasized and prioritized. Probably then they will become enabled.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, Ms. Geetha, I want to take a segue now to another part of a conversation. So, every profession, career, job, and line of work has its own stereotypes. So, these are like perceptions from usually people outside that profession or that career and who have a point of view about it. Sometimes they are absolutely wrong and sometimes they have some truth behind it. From your vantage point, what has been the stereotypes that have been attached to this line of work?
Yeah, I think I've covered some of the stereotypes in the course of the conversation, but probably to add to what I've already spoken, one part was the rote learning and enabling probably thinking out of the box, and so they think that some of these things kind of get tagged on to a teacher, that this is how the teaching profession is. And at times, I've also found people thinking that the teachers are lazy, so which isn't actually true. The other part of the teaching profession, from what I've seen, is it gets kind of involved in research as well. So teachers at some point of time are expected to publish papers, do research, and they're quantified by the number of publications, which I think kind of starts becoming a stereotype, because research need not always be a publication. Research could be reading a lot more on the particular topic that they're delivering. So research is just about doing something different and learning something different. So that is another part of stereotyping, where they think that teachers are supposed to be doing this kind of R&D, and it becomes a mandate. Also, the other thing which I've observed is, going home late after hours, kind of, you work beyond the working hours, and they think that this is kind of an okay thing to do as a teacher, which I think is actually stereotyping for some of these activities. Apart from this, I also look at students. So if there are the other side of stereotypes is, if there are students who actually fail in one or two subjects, or they aren't able to take exams, then they also kind of fall into that stereotypes, where I think it's not right to be categorized that way. So these are the two sides of, on one side it's the perception for a teacher, on the other side it's the perception for the student.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Ms. Geetha. All right, so we are almost at the rear end of our conversation, but I don't want to end this without asking you this question. Like, if you imagine there are people who are listening to this podcast and they have some idea about teaching, and they feel that they could pursue this as a career, but they don't know where to start. They don't know what experiences that they should have. What should they study? What would be your advice for them?
Uh, See, teaching is, being able to do it in whatever studies they have already started. Like, it could be in the science domain, or it could be in the arts, or in whatever field they are. So it doesn't become very specific, So it would be good if, a person who is really interested in becoming a teacher starts to participate, more actively in their current scenario itself. So if somebody is doing graduation and then they want to become teachers, then it's always good to have them participating in delivering lectures or seminars, or even doing peer tutoring. I found peer tutoring actually enables a lot of students to probably continue that as teachers. I found this in my experience. So also understand the needs, like I mentioned this before. So if somebody wants to become a teacher, then it's also required that they try to understand, because now they are students, so they really know what they want. So when they become teachers, they should be able to actually cater to what they were not able to get, or what they were able to get from a particular teacher. So I would say, understand, feel for the needs of a person, wherever the teaching is required. Also understand to a certain extent the relevance in their local society, and how they would like to see teaching as a profession, and also be able to convey to the audience. So communication, and having additional knowledge apart from what they're learning. Also managing several activities along with the teaching. Like if you are in the science domain, can you do something else in the liberal arts domain? So that will actually add value to the holistic learning of a student. So a person who would like to be a teacher, kind of needs to have this wholesome passion for grooming an individual to be able to do different activities and also become a good person in society.
I think the last one was really important, especially around having this holistic view instead of just very niched and narrow view of things. And I think also from my experiences being in industry, I felt that people who come with that wholesome experience really thrive and can connect different ideas together and actually work and bring more interesting solutions than people who perhaps having this very narrowed and very niched view of things. So I really enjoyed that part of your advice for future educators. So, Ms. Geetha, we are at the end of this show, and I wanted to ask you if you have recommendations for our audience, like especially around books and podcasts or blogs, anything that you feel has influenced your life that you would like other people to know about?
Yes, I think reading adds a lot of value, for a person who wants to become a teacher. It could be anything. It could be reading a magazine in their local language, and to be able to read newspapers on a regular basis, being connected with what's happening in the world, because I've seen a lot of students very curious to to be able to talk to the teacher about some incident that's actually happened in society. So I think for a teacher it's good to read anything that comes their way. It'll really add value. Specifically, some of the not exactly specific books, I would rather quote a few authors who've been able to write in very very simple language, and for a person to be able to relate to what's happening in the current society. And it's not even about what happened 10 years ago or 20 years ago or what's happening now. So these are beautiful short stories written by some specific authors, which kind of fits into any strata of society to be able to read and understand. So some of them are Chekhov. I've also liked short stories by Oscar Wilde. Then Chinua Achebe is an excellent Nigerian writer. Very nice short stories. You'll be able to actually relate to a lot of these societal good things and not so good things. And very specifically R.K. Narayan, whom I really admire for his writing. So rather than specific books, I would say these are authors whose stories have actually mattered to me.
I will try to leave these names in the show notes so that other people can find them. Thank you so much, Geetha. I think this has been amazing to talk to you and someone who has this wealth of experience in this field. And I really appreciate you and your time to come over on this show. So before we end, could you share what would be the right medium for people to reach out to you in case they have questions and ideas to share with you?
I'm available on LinkedIn. So I think anybody who is interested in connecting with me, they can always do so on LinkedIn.
All right. So I will leave also the LinkedIn address in the show notes so that people can find you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Vivek.
Thank you so much, Geetha. I think this has been wonderful, and I hope you have a fantastic day and fantastic year.
Thanks. Thanks. Same to you, Vivek. Let's keep connected. Thank you.
Please subscribe to the podcast In Your Shoes on the podcast channel, including Apple Podcast, Spotify, Overcast, Pocketcast, and others. To know more, please visit www.inyourshoes.com. That is INURShoes.com.